Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Scotland at 7 with me, Gordon Ross. It's the 8th of October. Joining me this evening in the studio, we'll have some new guests, well, new to me in many ways. First of all, let me introduce Ruth Watson from Save Scotland, the brand. Welcome to you, Ruth.
Almost right, Gordon. Keep Scotland the brand.
Is it Save Scotland, the brand? I'll get it right eventually, Ruth, don't worry.
I am so pleased to know that the campaign has got such reach. The name has imprinted indelibly on your brain.
It's brilliant. I'll always remember it from now on. Anyway, and also sitting opposite me this evening is Fergus Mutch, former SNP Communications Director and running as an MSP now, Fergus, I understand.
Well, hope I've got to get through the selection processes first, and I've got a contest on my hands, so a few hurdles to leap over between now and then, but hoping to be the SNP candidate for Aberdeenshire West for next week.
Well, the best of luck with that, Fergus. I'm going to press on in the beginning with the coronavirus update before we come to our main story. Now, as of 2 p.m. today, a total of 828,596 people in Scotland have now been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK government regional testing centres. Of these, 792,809 were confirmed negative. 35,787 were positive. There are now 1,027 new confirmed cases of COVID-19. There are 5 new reported deaths of people who have tested positive today. This will be an underestimate of the number of cases. Not everyone with the virus will display symptoms, and not all those with symptoms will be tested. Of the people who have tested positive, 377 were in hospital last night, 31 of whom were in intensive care. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus COVID-19 infection now stands at 2,538. Now, this number only includes those who have died in hospital, having received a positive test for the virus. The latest UK daily figures available show that 42,592 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 77 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings, not just hospitals. Now, if you'd like to join the conversation here this evening, you can do so on Twitter by following us at Broadcast Scot and using the hashtag Scotland at 7. And now to our main story this evening. There are plans for up to 10 inland border sites to cope with the Brexit chaos. The UK government has announced plans for up to 10 inland sites to cope with Brexit congestion and border checks, including in Birmingham, Warrington and at a former airfield near Epping Forest in Essex. The inland border sites are being acquired to relieve ports, including Dover and Liverpool, which could be in place for up to 2 years, according to one of the councils, where the planning process for infrastructure has already begun. Among the proposed sites is a second facility for Ashford in Kent, adjacent to the recently acquired Mojo lorry park, that will enable about 2,000 heavy goods vehicles to queue on the coastbound carriageway, while other traffic continues in both directions. The details were disclosed in a long-awaited update on the government's border operating model and are part of a plan to avert congestion and queues of up to 7,000 trucks in Kent. The document sets out new rules for border controls for travelling with EU member state national ID cards, no longer acceptable from 2021, when passports will be mandatory for entry into the UK. It also confirms that hauliers will need a Kent access permit to get into the county if they're heading for a ferry in Dover or a Eurotunnel train in Folkestone as part of congestion management. Following talks in Dublin with Irish Prime Minister Michael Martin today, European Council President Charles Michel called on the UK to put its cards on the table about the Brexit deal, saying that the EU needed clarity about their position. The coming days are crucial. This is the moment of truth. There is only 1 week to go before the European Council meeting on October the 15th to the 16th, Michel told journalists. Let me take you first, Ruth. Ladies first, I think, this evening. What's your reaction to this news about these wonderful new arrangements which the Tories are putting in place to cope with the Brexit chaos? Do you think this is going to work, or is this going to be even more pandemonium than we imagined?
Well, it's going to work if you're one of those people who has the contract for concreting over Brexit sunlit uplands, and if I don't know if you're somebody who perhaps has one of those fingers in a pie, which means you get to have the charge people 10 pence a go to use the public toilets that they're going to put in these places. I can only imagine that's where people are going to make their money out of Brexit, and these amazing big car parks that they're developing across prime agricultural land. I mean, it's so we've got Liz Truss announcing that there's no obligation to make sure that we have food standards. You have the Conservative Party last year saying that they had no obligation to ensure food security. So they're not only concreting over the prime farmland in the south of England and across England, they're not only jeopardizing the import of food and drink, the export of our food and drink. On top of that, you've got the reason that this is happening is because there are 11,000 HGV operators applied for these permits that they now need to be able to drive in Europe. None of which is the European Union's fault, all of which was perfectly anticipated several years ago when Brexit happened, because those are the rules for people out with the EU for driving in Europe. And out of the 11,000 applications that were made for the essential passes to be able to take their HGVs onto to the mainland of Europe, 1,000 passes were handed out. Now, add to that the complete and utter chaos regarding the differentiations of different tariffs and various items on the tariffs. You know, whether a widget, how you count and tally all the different items that are on your agenda it's no wonder they're going to. It's not going to be a lorry park for an evening or two. You're talking potentially about weeks of chaos. And why, oh why, are we not looking at opening up Scotland's ports so that we can reintroduce the regular sailings from, for example, Rosyth across to the a centuries old and essential transport link to ensure food supply and to ensure that we can access produce, because otherwise a whole load of the produce that's going to be coming in to England is going to get caught in the sludge of England and will get sort of diverted to local markets, whereas Scotland could have a perfectly functional port going from Ireland to Scotland, from Scotland to Europe and back again, and ensuring trade and the ingress of much needed produce and products.
Okay, listen, that was an excellent answer, Ruth. I'm certainly impressed by the idea of the ports, both importing and exporting east and west. If I could turn to you, Fergus, the political fallout was bad enough, but the practical fallout from Brexit looks like it is going to cause chaos. I mean, they're actually now putting these things in place. Previously, the Tories had said that this was the worst case scenario, but now it seems they're actually preparing for the worst case scenario.
It is chaotic, and it kind of speaks to the seat of their pants way in which this Tory government runs the country. That's one thing. I agree with the last couple of points made by Ruth there on Rosyth and gearing up these direct links between Scotland and continental Europe. I think that's an absolute must, and it goes for Rosyth, it goes for Aberdeen. We produce a lot of top quality food and drink and other goods for export in the Scotland. And it makes no sense for them to go down to the south coast of England, sit in a lorry park for days, red tape, and when we could be shipping those direct from Aberdeen. Aberdeen's just invested heavily in a brand new harbour extension that would work purpose. I think, to go back to the initial question, 4 years ago, more than 4 years ago now, the UK voted to leave the EU. There was that
England
old refrain
did.
from the
Scotland
Tories that the UK voted to leave the EU, and Scotland, in fact, in the first few months, offered some suggested compromises for maintaining
Yeah.
single market membership, which would have worked and would have avoided these exact consequences. The prevailing Tory refrain at the time was Brexit is Brexit and we're going to make a success of it. And nothing that has happened in the past 4 years has shown they're capable of doing that. Who would have thought we'd have got to the stage where we're looking at visas to get in or out, goods in or out of Kent, for goodness sake. During the general election last year, I was a candidate in West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine. I was speaking to a shellfish and seafood exporter, a small batch exporter in the northeast of Scotland. We're really, really worried about this eventuality that we're seeing unfolding now.
Mm-hmm.
They rely on a good quality product being shipped direct with no delays to Europe, and they command a decent price for that product. The issue is if there's red tape, lorry parks, delays in the south of England, the longer fresh produce sits there, the less value.
Yeah, it's got to spoil, isn't it?
And everyone suffers. Yeah.
Well, listen, Fergus, I'm sorry to cut you off there, but actually the next part of our bulletin covers food in some detail, with the UK government confirming plans to water down food standards to chase trade deals. The SNP has warned the Tory government against watering down high food and environmental standards currently in place in order to pursue post-Brexit trade deals, putting at risk Scotland's world-leading food and agricultural sector and threatening the food stores with Frankenfoods. The warning comes after a letter to MPs from the UK government's Environmental Minister, Victoria Prentice, when it stated that the government would reject amendments to the agricultural bill brought forward in the Lords because they risked adverse effects on trade. The minister claimed that the amendments to protect and strengthen domestic UK food standards would make it very difficult to secure any new trade deals. Earlier, a new survey published by Which found that the overwhelming majority of Scottish people are opposed to Boris Johnson's plans for a race to the bottom in food standards that will allow chlorinated chicken and hormone-injected beef to flood Scottish shops and supermarkets post-Brexit. Now, I think, Ruth, I know you will have a lot to say about this particular subject. What's your reaction to this, that the watering down is now being confirmed, that they are planning to lower these standards?
I'm raging. It's been something which we have been warning about for over 3 years. It has been evident to anybody that was watching that the Tories were, well, not just the Conservative part, obviously they're the ones putting the legislation through, but the radical Brexiters seem to be determined that Brexit should happen at any cost and in any way. And for them to turn around and put the whole thing about food standards right to the bottom of the quality pile. We've been warning about this for a long time. Scotland's reputation as a food and drink exporter comes about because people trust our produce. Well, I lived in Asia where there was you could smell the pesticides on the pak choy when it was delivered, and people who had the deep pockets would spend the extra money to buy Scottish produce because they trusted it. European produce, EU produce went at a premium. Scottish produce was right at the top of the price list for that. If you're talking about a premium export market, then you're talking about a country that people can trust. Now, I value that at home now, but now I'm back in Scotland. I value being able to put food and drink I can trust on my kids' tables. I value living in a rural community. I value the fact that my community can produce high quality food, which we take as standard. There's going to be a whole new range of food injustice. Not only are we facing the iniquitous outrage of people being hungry in one of the richest countries in the world, but we're now going to have the situation where only those with deep pockets and the time to find out about it are going to go to artisanal shops to get high quality food that hasn't been pumped full of chemicals or animals that have been raised to appalling welfare standards. And the whole nonsense that Liz Truss was talking about the other day about, oh, well, we can't have high food standards because that discriminates somehow against the developing countries and developing economies. That's absolute tosh, because if developing countries are raising food for European, for example, EU standard markets, that does those countries and the people working in those countries and the vulnerable people, often the poorest of the poor working in the fields, that offers them protections, because in order to live up to EU standards, they cannot be using the pesticides and the dangerous treatments, which often these folk are really, you talk about folk in flip-flops walking through pesticides. That's what Liz Truss not only is talking at inflicting on them further, where we have an opportunity to make their work lives better, but then ending up pouring this poisonous produce on our shelves and putting our own farmers who produce good food and drink out of business. So how about we keep our high standards and help people in developing countries raise their standards, because that is what the market is demanding and makes people healthier and safer over there. And there's a whole swathe of folk. We want, like, bairns born with birth defects because of pesticide exposure. That is what high standards avoids. And if we go down to those levels, well, hell mend us.
Thank you very much, Ruth. An excellent reply there. Fergus, I'm minded to ask you here, because you're standing in Aberdeen, how Aberdeen farmers are going to react to this, particularly Aberdeen Angus beef farmers. Surely there's going to be outrage at this. I think we might have lost Fergus for the moment. We'll come back to this in a moment. Are we able to get Fergus back? No, I think he's frozen for the moment. Okay, maybe we can continue to talk about this, Ruth. You are obviously somebody who is very passionate about Scotland, the brand, and this, it seems, is basically going to ruin Scotland, the brand, isn't it? Because we're going to have these low standards.
So the day after the English government, as part of evil English votes for English laws, in December 2018, in preparation for Brexit, they removed animal sentience from their regulations. And the next day, Scotland's farmers were beating a path to Holyrood's door, demanding that animal sentience, do animals feel, do they have emotions, do they feel pain, do they feel misery and unhappiness, for that to be on our legislative books. And it not only was kept, it was strengthened. And one of the reasons that matters is not only because if you're a decent human being, you want the animals that are part of our food chain, to have a high quality life and a quick and humane death. Not only do you want that because you're a decent human being, you want that because actually the food and drink is better. You can see if an animal has been killed in circumstances where they are fearful, or they have been in pain, or they've been injured. Apparently, I'm a vegetarian, but I am told you can see these things in the meat. It's apparent. Yeah. So not only are you talking about it from a high produce point of view, you're talking about it from the just basically being a decent human being. So the farmers' leaders, the food and drink leaders, have given evidence to numerous parliamentary committees saying we have to maintain our standards. We will never be a nation which can do the whole stack it high, sell it low budgets. Our model is based on quality and a fair price because of that. Yeah. And the animals that we raise, actually, if you're talking, not just it's arable as well, but if you're talking about livestock farmers having to compete against these huge, I mean, it just mind-boggling lots of animals who never get to walk in a field. They're it's like battery hens, but with cows. Yeah. Battery hens with 4 legs. It's an appalling way for an animal to be raised. There is endless environmental catastrophe about it, and here we are in Scotland. And our life is trotting out on the hills. You don't get much more carbon friendly, you don't get much more environmentally friendly than converting heather and grass into food. I mean, it's how would we, from any point of view, you're looking at it from the point of view of the environment, whether you're looking at it from the point of view of our children being able to eat good food and drink, whether you're looking at it from the economy or the tourism economy, which will come back after COVID. Yeah. All of these things, we are risking losing for what? Some ideological, bombastic rush to the bottom. It makes absolutely no sense.
Well, listen, thank you very much for that, Ruth. I'm going to move on to our next story now. Hopefully, we'll be able to we'll get Fergus back later on. The next story concerns Chris Stevens. Now, Chris Stevens, MP, has ramped up pressure on the UK government over no recourse to public funds. The Tory government is under renewed pressure to scrap its damaging no recourse to public funds policy, which continues to push people into hardship and destitution due to being denied access to key support. The policy, which the SNP has repeatedly challenged the Tory government on, excludes affected people from accessing financial support, including universal credit and housing assistance. Ahead of a Westminster Hall debate today on the impact of the policy, SNP MP Chris Stevens warned that people who cannot access support face being disproportionately hit due to the double hit of financial difficulties and the impact of the coronavirus pandemic. Earlier this year, Boris Johnson revealed that he was unaware that thousands of people were being locked out of available support, including universal credit and housing benefits, due to his government's NRPF rules. Johnson pledged to see what we can do to help, but no further help has been forthcoming. Now, let's see. Have we got Fergus back online yet? I don't think we do. Okay, Ruth, I'm going to hand over to you again. So here is another policy of the Tory government, which is denying access to funds for people in desperate need. And Boris Johnson is saying that he's going to see what he can do. That's not enough, is it?
Well, I'm going to take a little moment to try and sort of give you a vague perspective, some perspective from my point of view on this. So I lived in Malaysia and I lived in Australia for a while. And while there, my husband was working, we had no recourse to public funds. So that meant that we had to be able to sustain ourselves through my husband's employment, which was very well paid. And so we were not in that point of destitution. So I can understand that trying to be fair, that looking at, if you're looking at an immigration policy, then it is fairly standard for people to come into a country that have no recourse to public funds, so that you're not being a drain on the society that you're moving to. However, when you have got people who are coming to this country looking for asylum, quite perfectly legitimately looking for asylum or having migration issues, if they are not allowed to work because of the Home Office rules, what are they supposed to do? That to me is in the injustice of it. If you're going to have a policy which says people have no recourse to public funds, and I do have quite strong views about that, but to try and look at it, so to try and take an overview and be fair about it. Why then would you say that those people aren't able to work? Many years ago, when I was working for the BBC, back in the days when I was proud of that, we did a program looking at refugees, and I did interviews with people who were doctors, they were professors, they were often what happens, and people really don't really see this because our media tends not to give us the side of the story. But the people who come to these shores seeking refuge often are those people who are well educated and whose families have got recourse to funds, because it's really expensive to be people smugglers who are the lowest of the low. It costs a lot to get people here, and so the people who come here tend to be extremely capable, highly educated. So we give them no recourse to public funds, but we also don't allow them to work and contribute to this country. And that, to me, is a system which is in serious need of being looked at.
Okay. I'm glad to say that we have Fergus Mutch back with us. Fergus, I hope, did you manage to pick up much of that last item there?
We're on to no recourse to public funds.
Yes, that's right, Fergus. Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. Sorry to dip out for a second there.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean this. It's pretty shameful. It's typically shameful of this UK government as well. The way that we treat some of the most desperate, disadvantaged people in the most difficult situations, more difficult than I could ever imagine, to be honest, is bad enough anyway. particularly at the moment, people coming to this country in desperate circumstances, no recourse to public funds just is inhumane. It shouldn't remain the government position. And yes, I think these calls are right, and they're very much important in the circumstances that we find ourselves in at the moment.
So this, it seems, I would say, Fergus, is probably part of the government's hostile environment, which seems to get more and more hostile by the day. When people are being plucked out of boats and dinghies in the English Channel, desperate, who often run from warfare and abuse and danger, suddenly find themselves in a foreign country, not allowed to work, with no money, nowhere to live. What are they supposed to do? I mean, there is nothing that they can do, is there? They're completely at the mercy of the British government.
Completely, and it's completely inhumane. I mean, we've seen these extremely troubling scenes in recent months of people fleeing across the English Channel. Unfortunately, some of our national broadcasters, BBC and Sky included, decided to make a safari of it, rather turn it into a sort of gruesome spectator sport, voyeurism almost. These people in extreme situations. Actually, these are humans. We should treat them as such. And frankly, the sort of Scotland I want to see is one where we welcome people in, but also where people are fleeing the most desperate situations. We offer them refuge and we offer them help.
Okay. Well, listen, I'd like to move on now, if I may. We have just heard news, actually, that Boris Johnson, according to a report out today, has spent nearly £5 million on private jets just to deport migrants, and yet he will not make funds available to migrants to actually survive. But £5 million.
But this shows you that it is not about. This shows you that the policy and the hostile environment is not about money. It's about a philosophy. And it's in the same way that the Trump government decided that they were going to remove children from parents. That wasn't about what was best for parents or for children, or even for managing the migration issue. That was to put the fear of God into people. And that is what this government is trying to do. It is not about money. It is about trying to be as cruel as possible to try and fight people into staying in country. However, you just have to look at a few of the very prominent Brexiters who have chosen to go and live in Europe or elsewhere to see that it doesn't take much to turn those gentle little snowflakes into migrants.
Okay.
This
Fergus,
is
what do you
actually
think?
just the latest.
£5 million pounds on renting jets to get rid of people? I mean,
it shows you they've got their priorities all wrong. We can't put our hands in our pockets to help these people, but we can spend, a huge sum of money just getting rid of them. And this actually is just part of a much larger figure. I think it's almost 100 million that's been spent on these deportation flights since 2010, which is pretty sickening, actually.
Okay. There are also some. I was going to say there are some other press releases. We can return to those momentarily. Until next story this evening, more than 80% of positive cases on the Office for National Statistics study have no core symptoms. It's been revealed that more than 80% of people who tested positive in a national coronavirus survey had none of the core symptoms of the disease the day they took the test, scientists say. The finding has prompted fears that the future COVID-19 outbreaks will be very hard to control without more widespread testing in the community to pick up silent transmission, particularly in universities and high-risk workplaces such as meat processing facilities. Researchers at UCL said that 86.1% of infected people picked up by the Office for National Statistics COVID-19 survey between April and June had none of the main symptoms of the illness, namely a cough or a fever or a loss of taste or smell the day they had the test. 3/4 who tested positive had no notable symptoms at all, the scientists found, when they checked whether people reported other ailments such as fatigue or breathlessness on the day of testing. Unlike coronavirus testing in the community, which focuses on people with symptoms, the ONS Infection Survey routinely tests tens of thousands of households around the country whether the occupants have symptoms or not. I have to say, Ruth, this is deeply worrying, isn't it? That a vast majority of the cases revealed in these random studies have absolutely no symptoms. People would just not know that they were carrying the virus.
I guess on the one hand, it is really worrying because you want to know who's got it so that you can try and protect those who will be vulnerable to it. On the other hand, I guess the good news is lots of people have it and it's not killing them.
Well, I suppose so. That is a silver lining in the cloud, I guess. Fergus, what do you think? Is this more worrying than reassuring, or do you think we should take some comfort from the fact that so many people are not symptomatic?
I mean, obviously, the current situation with COVID is deeply concerning. This, I suppose, underlines why it's so important to listen to the advice that's coming from government, to wear a face mask, to take all the necessary precautions when you're out in public places, to socially distance, because even though you feel absolutely fine, you could be carrying the virus, and you should be extra careful and extra vigilant. And we all have a responsibility to each other and to our communities to follow that advice and to do our bit.
Okay, well, thank you both.
I think
very much.
one of the other aspects of it is that from what I can gather from following Professor Devi Sridhar's Twitter feed assiduously, what I can gather is that one of the reasons they think that these cases there may be more asymptomatic people around is because wearing face masks and washing our hands and socially distancing is working, because the viral load we are being exposed to is reduced, which means the symptoms we experience are either zero or lessened. So it is really worrying. I mean, obviously, the sooner we can get mass testing or vaccinations that are effective, the better. But I think it does show that from an epidemiologist point of view, it's a nightmare. But from a clinical point of view, it does show that the measures people are taking are working.
I think that's a very interesting observation, actually, Ruth. I haven't heard that, but I think that sounds very logical to me. Anyway, I would like to leave this subject now, moving across the Atlantic to the American presidential elections. Biden is apparently to talk to voters directly as Mr. Trump skips the October 15th debate. Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden will take questions directly from voters next week, given President Donald Trump's decision to pull out of a scheduled presidential debate on October the 15th, since it was moved online, Biden's campaign said on Thursday. In addition, the campaign called for rescheduling of the debate. Given the president's refusal to participate on October the 15th, we hope that the debate commission will move the Biden-Trump town hall to October the 22nd so that the president is not able to evade accountability. Biden campaign spokeswoman Kate Bedingfield said in a statement, the voters should have a choice to ask questions of both candidates directly. Let me come to you first, Fergus, on this. Now, it's been said that Mr. Trump has been attempting to evade accountability, presumably using his COVID infection as an excuse, perhaps, I don't know. But he seems to be of the opinion, Mr. Trump, that online debates have no value, that he's also apparently been saying that he's worried that a moderator will be able to cut him off. Something which didn't happen in the first televised debate, as Mr. Trump kept talking over the moderator. Do you think Mr. Trump is really just a sore loser, and this is him just trying to evade scrutiny?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's a petulant child, sore loser. He is avoiding accountability, but also there's a real element of he probably doesn't care. He thinks he can do what he likes. He feels no responsibility to give answers to the American people, and he'll have looked at his the reaction to the first debate and thought, "There's no value to me taking part in this." He didn't see a poll bump, so
Yeah.
what's the point? Not,
So,
not that I'm saying for a second that Joe Biden was the outstanding winner of the first debate.
no, it
It
was
was a
an
pretty
ugly
terrible
contest, wasn't it?
spectacle round.
Well, let
But
me
I
come to you.
really don't think he will care too much.
You think Mr. Trump maybe just doesn't like anything where he doesn't see any benefit in it for him? Is that pretty much the situation, do you think?
He probably gets more of a story about setting the terms out of refusing to comply or to cooperate than
You
he
think it,
does from the spectacle of another debate. Done one, and he probably doesn't see the value in doing another.
that's fair enough. Ruth, what's your opinion of Mr. Trump's apparent reluctance to appear even on an online debate?
I think that it perhaps feeds into the narrative that COVID is a problem and he's infectious, and that may be one of the reasons why he doesn't want to take part. I saw somewhere earlier, I think it may have been with a Kennedy election, that there was a previous, back in the 1950s or 60s, I skimmed it, where there was an online, a televised debate, and the candidates were in different locations. So there is a precedent for it. So Trump has no leg to stand on in that regard. I think that it stands. The Republicans were very unhappy at there being perspex screens with the vice presidential debate last night.
Yeah.
I think this feeds much more into their narrative that COVID is nothing to be worried of, and I think they're particularly sensitive to the fact that the fact that the White House now has got more cases of coronavirus than Vietnam, New Zealand, and Taiwan put together. Now
That's
that is
quite a feat, isn't it?
yeah, and that's a narrative that's going around America, and it's really hitting Trump hard in the polls. So I think that's perhaps what's behind it.
Just before we leave this, Ruth, I had just one other question for you. Mr. Trump is well known for enjoying public adulation, and he has said that he plans to hold a rally instead. Do you think this is really just because he just soaks up the adulation? He can't seem to live without that.
Oh, he's a man-child. I mean, he just can't. He's like a toddler that needs to have people clapping and telling him he's a clever boy. I mean, I can't imagine what potty training was like.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that comment. Okay, moving along. And we're now going to be talking about closing the attainment gap. 9 out of 10 head teachers, that's 91%, say that a fund to help school pupils in the most deprived areas to meet their full potential is making an impact. The pre-COVID-19 evaluation of the £750 million Attainment Scotland Fund, or the ASF, covering 2018 and 19, has been published and aims to provide learning about the overall implementation of the fund and the extent to which its aims have been met. The evaluation found that there has been a systematic change in culture and ethos, with approaches to equity becoming more embedded within the school as a result of greater understanding of the barriers faced by pupils and families from disadvantaged communities. Also published, a Scotland-wide survey of more than 1,100 head teachers reported that approaches supported by the ASF are helping to close the poverty-related attainment gap. The findings feed into the ASF evaluation. Nearly all the head teachers, 98% of them, expected to see improvements in closing the gap over the next 5 years, a slight increase of 3 percentage points since 2018. Let me ask you about this one, Fergus. I have to be honest with you, I hadn't known about this. I maybe knew about it before, but I had forgotten about it. But this government what we would call this government scheme to help close the attainment gap does seem to be actually working. And when teachers come back and actually say these things, I think you could take that to the bank.
Yeah, it's extremely encouraging. The overwhelming majority of head teachers are noting improvements in reducing the poverty-related attainment gap. We know that attainment gap is very stubborn. It's taken some time for perhaps those results to show up, but what John Swinney has been making a priority of is getting the right funds in the hands of head teachers who know best about what their specific school needs to drive up standards. Of course, this study was done before COVID. We know for a fact that the past 6 months have presented a whole new host of challenges, and those will have to be tackled in the years ahead. But yeah, it certainly looks here like this is some good news.
Excellent. Okay. Ruth, I don't know how you feel about this. It seems to be the first glimmerings of success for a government programme, which, as Fergus says, is dealing with a very stubborn problem in deprived areas of closing the attainment gap for children from deprived backgrounds.
I think that trusting teachers is one of the smartest things anybody can do. They work extremely hard. They do a lot of work within the community, which goes way beyond reading, writing, and arithmetic. I sit on a fostering and adoption panel, and some of the cases that I see coming before us, the deprivation and the traumas that children from many backgrounds have to deal with, just either looking at somebody who's hungry or looking at somebody who has got much deeper problems than that. And I'm constantly impressed by the significant role teachers play in helping those kids to come out the other end, and the remarkable work which is done to make sure that youngsters have got equality of access to a good education and to a supportive system. The one thing that I would say the government could do better is by supporting to make sure that local councils fund and value social services more, because I think that that the tie-in between teaching and social services in dealing with those people who are experiencing poverty and other issues. Obviously, not everybody who's poor has these fundamental issues going on. But I think that trusting teachers to deliver and community schools really being a significant part of the community and respected as such is only good news.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Ruth. Okay, moving on now. And night shelters are to be phased out. Night shelters will be replaced with rapid rehousing welcome centres for people who would otherwise be sleeping rough this winter in updated plans for tackling homelessness. The centres will provide emergency accommodation for people who have no other options, encouraging them to move on to other services. People using the centres will be offered targeted support, including for well-being, health and social care issues, legal rights, employment and welfare. Announced today in an updated action plan for tackling homelessness, the centres are part of plans to phase out night shelters entirely by expanding rapid rehousing approaches such as Housing First that provide settled accommodation as quickly as possible. The Ending Homelessness Together updated plan also contains actions that will minimise the risk of evictions, strengthen protections for people experiencing domestic abuse, give people with lived experience of homelessness or rough sleeping a greater say in the development of policy, and also to explore the routes for reducing migrant homelessness. Now this ties in, Fergus, very, very neatly with what we were talking about earlier on about the experience of migrants coming to the United Kingdom. And I think here we see in Scotland a different approach to the issue of homelessness for everybody who's homeless. But in the case of migrants, they obviously also have a pressing need. Is this, do you think, that again, the first evidence that this process is still ongoing and it's about to reach another critical phase? I reported on it a few months ago, I remember. It does seem to be moving along fairly quickly.
What's quite interesting is that the governments, and this is Scotland and across Europe, have really struggled in getting a grip of homelessness, rough sleeping, until the coronavirus pandemic hit this year, and then lo and behold, governments everywhere managed to find a quick and ready solution to rehouse people. And it shows, what can be done where there's a will, there's a way. I think this is a really encouraging announcement today. So, this is the end of night shelters, rapid rehousing, shifting the emphasis from, a short-term fix to a long-term solution. And I think that's all for the good.
Okay. Ruth, I know from speaking to homeless people myself that one of the things they say is that they don't like these shelters either. They never feel safe in them. And I think for many of them, just having a home of any kind would be an improvement over the shelters. Do you think this is going to get us to that point fairly soon?
I think that the concept of it's the Everyone Home is a collective of 21 homelessness charities that they're getting together to present to give what's they're calling wraparound support. And I think that aspect is what is so important. Very few people become homeless just sort of overnight. There's very few people become homeless and you can't see it coming. For a lot of people, homelessness comes about either through family breakdowns, perhaps there's violence or domestic abuse, or sort of peer abuse within a family, or it may be to do with drink or alcohol abuse, or a combination of all of the above. And to have wraparound support, which means that somebody who's coming into a homelessness facility is being given support to help them tackle some of the other issues. One of the things that the Scottish Government did very well, I think, was by ensuring that children with cared for experience had there's a system whereby they can access support into young adulthood, into their 20s. And I think that's very significant, because a lot of homelessness within people who have had lived in a sort of foster care experience, for example.
So we're looked after.
Looked after kids. So that has come about because they get given a home, but they've no idea. I mean, when you were 17, 18, the thought of being able to
you don't know how to live by yourself,
pay your bills, not get taken advantage of by other folk around you, and so to have people who have got that aspect taken care of, that's been a really important thing. But you've got the issue of veterans, people coming out of the armed forces, perhaps with all sorts of psychological issues going on. It just, there but for the grace of God goes any one of us, There was one day last winter, and I was just about greeting. There was this guy sitting outside the middle of Dundee, sitting outside one of the shopping areas, and the guy was shaking. I mean, he was almost in a riger. He was shaking so much, and I was there getting winter clothes for my kids, and I genuinely thought I might be looking at somebody who could be dead that night. Yeah. And we spoke to him and said, what are you doing? What can I get you? Because I don't like to give money to people, because if you give money to people, that can end up being used for drug abuse. And he was saying, I just need £8 more to be able to get a night in the shelter tonight. And there was another woman saw me, and she came over, and between us we got. I mean, I don't like giving money to folk. But I couldn't look at somebody I thought was going to be dead the next morning if we didn't help him. We as a nation, we have to get this sorted.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that anecdote as well. It's an interesting story. Okay, moving along, and we're now talking about supporting local government in recovery. A package of financial flexibilities and extra funding for councils, which could be worth up to £750 million, has been agreed by the Scottish Government in partnership with COSLA. To address the financial pressures caused by coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic over the next 2 years, councils will be granted additional spending powers, which could be worth around £600 million. In addition to this, lost income scheme will be established to help compensate councils and council trust for lost sales, fees, charges, and for services such as sports centres and parking charges. Councils under trust will have access to an estimated £90 million of funding, with council trust delivering services on behalf of councils able to receive a share of a further £49 million of public support through the scheme. Added to additional funding already committed, this brings the value of the overall COVID-19 support package for councils to more than £1 billion. Fergus, this is going to be a tremendous help, surely, to struggling councils who are going to have to rebuild everything after COVID has finally, hopefully, run its course and we have a vaccine.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's three kind of public services that have really borne the brunt of the pressure over the last few months. That's NHS, obviously. We're dealing with a global health pandemic.
Yeah.
Our schools, who are education services, and our local authorities, who've really had to adapt to provide services throughout the difficulties that we've all faced during recent months, and design new services, and also, as you point out there in your introduction, have seen their revenue sources dry up in some cases.
Yeah.
So this is very welcome funding, and I'm sure local authorities throughout Scotland will be appreciative of.
Okay, thank you, Fergus. Ruth, I just want to get you to hang on for a moment because I'd like to involve you in our next story just in a moment. Now, this next story is about investing in skills to support recovery. People who have lost their jobs or who are at risk of redundancy as a result of COVID-19 can access support to retrain through a new fund launched by the Economy Secretary, Fiona Hislop. The £25 million National Transition Training Fund, a flagship programme for government commitment, will help up to 10,000 people aged 25 and over to develop the skills required to move into sectors with the greatest potential for growth and job opportunities. The fund will help to boost the supply of skills in areas such as sustainable green jobs and to raise the profile of training opportunities linked to Scotland's transition to a net carbon zero economy. So this, Ruth, is a new one as well, I think, for me anyway, to hear this, that the government is trying to invest in new skills and providing money for, I think, I said up to 10,000 people to retrain for these new green jobs.
There was a report I saw yesterday saying that from an environmental body saying that Scotland has the potential to become the first carbon neutral nation out of the four nations. And I think that initiatives like this give us the opportunity to be able to do that. So it is very exciting to see that when you're looking at the potential for wave energy, for wind energy, but also just helping people do things differently, just perhaps, finding people, whether it's somebody who's working in a community garden or helping school children understand the value of growing their own seeds, or whether you're looking at people, sort of retraining, upskilling their engineering so that they can take part in the wind revolution. Ha ha ha. It's no. I hope that it is one of those things which produces useful training outcomes rather than just a tick box exercise. And I certainly don't want to see our musicians and our artists trying to retrain into something which removes the cultural benefits they bring to us.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Ruth. Fergus, it's time for you to respond to this as well. Retraining, the question in my mind is retraining for which jobs, and how does the government, do you think, figure this out, which jobs to retrain for? Is that up to government or would that be up to industry, do you think?
I think it's government in conjunction with industry, and also in conjunction with our universities and college sector too. I've actually gone back to uni this time. I'm doing an online short course that has been supported by government funding for upskilling and retraining in the wake of coronavirus. I'm benefiting from that this term, and I'm doing a mediation course in the law school at Aberdeen Uni online this term. And it's, I studied law in a previous life. I'm going back and doing a postgraduate, and that's great. It's an opportunity for people, and it's made affordable by government for people to think about what they're doing. And when you're sitting at home, relatively underemployed at the moment in many cases, then that's maybe no bad use of time. And whether it's skills, whether it's qualifications, this is all for the good. If we have a skilled workforce, then everybody benefits at the end of it.
Do you think perhaps, just before we leave this subject, Fergus, that the coronavirus, we've mentioned potential silver linings in some areas, but one of the silver linings I always think is that it's given us breathing space to actually think about the future of the entire country, and to take some time to actually start to figure out what direction we should take. Do you think that's also been the case for government as well? Do you think it's given the Scottish Government time to think, or have they been just too busy firefighting the virus?
No, absolutely, and I think everyone's eye is on both on the immediate challenges that we face, which are doubtless difficult, and when you're talking about tens of thousands of job losses, then that's very, very serious. But also, it is an opportunity to think about how do we build for the future, and how do we, I suppose, insulate ourselves against something like this happening again.
Okay.
Well, one of the things I have found very interesting is one of my friends. Her son makes bagpipes, or the kind of I can't remember the soft pipes ones you put under your arm, and his books are now full because people during lockdown have decided that they want to learn new musical instruments, and in fact this evening I've been very naughty and I've ducked out of an online group chat that I'm a part of for the Open University Scots language course, which is actually a free course. So there are opportunities open to people that the Scottish Government has made possible through organisations like the Open University and the really interesting Scots language courses and others that are out there. So there's actually quite a lot of different courses that people can do, just short wee courses, but they're free, and I think that one of those kinds of things have been one of the few benefits to come out of this, is that people have been exploring more options in terms of education or interests and hobbies.
Okay, Ruth, thanks for that. Another excellent comment. Final story this evening. The American poet Louise Glick has won the Nobel Prize for Literature. American poet Louise Glick won the 2020 Nobel Prize for Literature for works exploring family and childhood in an unmistakable voice with an austere beauty that makes individual existence universal, the Swedish Academy said on Thursday. Academy Permanent Secretary Mats Walm said that Glick, 77, also a multiple winner of US literary awards, was surprised and happy at the news when it came in the early hours US time. She gave no immediate comment to journalists gathered outside her home in Cambridge, Massachusetts. A professor of English at Yale University, Glick first rose to critical acclaim in 1968 with a collection of poems entitled Firstborn, and went on to become one of the most eminent poets and essayists in contemporary America. The Swedish Academy said that Glick's works, the self listens for what is left of the dreams and delusions, and nobody can be harder than she in confronting illusions of self. Drawing comparisons with other authors, the Academy said that Glick resembled 19th century US poet Emily Dickinson in her severity and unwillingness to accept simple tenets of faith. Now, I have to express my complete ignorance about this lady's poetry. Perhaps one of you, maybe you, Ruth, might know a little bit of her poetry, or may be able to comment on this.
Well, I was unaware of her, I'm ashamed to say, until this evening, and I saw that she'd won. But I really like Emily Dickinson. I did a bit of English literature course a few years ago, and Emily Dickinson has always been one of my favourite poets. But considering the material we've been talking about this evening, from homelessness to refugees left with nothing, I thought the first stanza of her poem Snowdrops was appropriate. Do you know what I was, how I lived? You know what despair is, then winter should have meaning for you. Yeah. And I just think that sums it up beautifully.
She's also very economical with her truths, I think. What about you, Fergus? Are you familiar with Glick's work?
I'd heard of her. I wasn't too familiar. I saw the news and checked out some of her poetry today, and what an antidote to these times that we're living through. It's beautifully crafted, focusing on a lot of the human condition. Themes such as childhood, family life. It's very raw. It's wonderful stuff, and I'd encourage everyone to check it out. Interestingly, I think there's been 17 or 18 Nobel laureates who've hailed from Scotland over the 120 years of the Nobel Prize. Not one in literature yet, but
maybe it's time, Fergus.
We'll wait and see. In every other discipline, though.
Okay.
It's something we don't. It's something that we don't shout about enough. Actually, our success in our Nobel laureates.
Well, maybe one day soon. Anyway, that's just about it from Scotland at 7 this evening. It just remains for me to do what I always do at this time of night, and to remind you that if you would like to help us make more programmes on Scotland at 7, you can do so by following the instructions on your screen now to become a supporter of Broadcasting Scotland. But that's it from me this evening. I would just like to thank both my guests, Ruth Watson and Fergus Mutch, and wish you all a very good evening. Bye for now.